And now I'm sharing this. So I sent you guys an email yesterday. No worries if you hadn't had a chance to go through it. I was a little bit confused about what we were doing last week. And so you'll see in there that we were supposed to go through the essential questions in that one document. And so we'll get through them hopefully at another time. I think we actually probably our conversation ended up going through a lot of them. But so far, we'll just go back through and make sure that we touch on them. So based on the scheduling review that we were doing in the last meeting, we wanted to go through this first part about our insights, what we're wondering, and our actions. One aha moment I had in our group is it wasn't clear to me that on the days, so for the 2-day on, 2-day off model, the 2 days that you're teaching one group of students, the distance learning is something separate, and maybe they're not actually calling into your lesson that you're giving to the students in the classroom. And so that one of the questions was, well, then how is virtual learning taking place with teachers already teaching in the classroom something separate? Is it like packets? And then are you basically repeating the same lesson plan that you did 2 days in a row, doing it again? So that was one thing I had. Anybody else?
Yeah, I had in our group, I had an aha based on the concept of the lunch cycle for the kids. And there was a nurse in our group that basically was like, you know, I'm terrified of the thought of having all of our kids in separate classrooms eating. She suggested, you know, for health reasons that we consider letting them eat outside so that at least the distance, you know, could be maintained. So that was kind of an aha for me, for sure. I'm like, oh, I didn't even think about it like that.
Can you share what specifically she was terrified about?
Basically, not all of the classrooms have sinks, you know, to be able to, for kids to wash hands and be as, you know, clean as possible when they're eating, especially the little ones. She basically said, you know, for health reasons, it's just not as sanitary as it would need to be throughout all of the classrooms across ACPS. And she said either an outside option or, you know, having 3 kids eat in a classroom at one time and then like cycle them out in some way, or think of something that eliminates a lot of kids eating in one place at one time.
So just for reference, so I mean, I can't speak for every space in ACPS, but I'm at Cora Kelly and we do have full breakfast in the classrooms every day. So there is a model for that we could look to. You know, the teachers are trained in, and it certainly puts an additional burden on teachers, but they are trained in how to ensure like the cleanliness, and we have special like table cleaner that we use that's food safe. So I hear that. I just wanted to let you know there is a model for that we could work towards if necessary.
No, that sounds good. Would that be the case for all the other schools though?
Well, we could use that model and the training program that teachers have to go through and that our custodial staff go through to provide that access to food in the classroom. We could use that model to scale up for all schools. I know Cora Kelly and William Ramsey both have full breakfast in the classroom every day. It's so we have a way we could look to something as a model to grow
like
from.
Yeah.
Well, I'm also thinking about the fact that the students will take off their mask and they'll be now more exposed to one another. So that's what I would be also worried about, the fact that I will take off my mask and everybody else will as well. And heaven forbid, do I have the COVID-19 and pass it along to everybody else? You know, that's what I would be worried about. And that we can't change.
You know, I don't know if this is an aha moment or just a confirmation. I think one of the things that we came away from last week's meeting was the virtual option needs to be very robust because the data is so fluid. You know, what is safe kind of shifts a little bit, and at any time, someone could be for all the reason we're talking about, it could infect someone right now or test positive right now, so you could be right back at that model. So I just felt like, yep, we said it last week, and I found myself looking at the news and listening to us talk that at any time we could be 100% virtual, so that, there always needs to be a focus on making that as robust and effective as possible, because you never know when we'll be there.
Completely agree. That was one thing we talked about in our group too. It sounds like we keep saying virtual or hybrid when we should be saying virtual and hybrid consistently. And I think some people are thinking one or the other when it needs to be both at the same time. And because I think someone in our group said, how many students actually are coming back? Like, we can't make them come back. So these numbers may not even be reflective of what we're actually going to see. And we, like I said, like we need to have a really robust virtual plan, as well as the hybrid plan with all the scheduling. So
I was on, and our discussion in AHA was about the transportation. That was a big talk about ours, as we had somebody from transportation. And when you look at a school like Patrick Henry and MacArthur that are going to be together in the same area, what is that going to look like? The AHA, I guess you could say, is the traffic around that, in that area of getting all of the buses and the transportation. Another AHA is our bus drivers. Will we have as many bus drivers coming back as we think? That might be something that some of our bus drivers, who many of them are older, might consider not coming back. And a question for the scheduling was also, what would our day look like? Would we be in school from 7:55 to 2:35 on the elementary level, or would we be doing a half day? And if we did a half day, some type of modified schedule, again, going back to transportation, how much of the day is being spent transporting children to and from school, using one or two kids? I mean, not one or two kids, having seating for 1 to 2 children on the bus.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I think it connects back to one of the larger questions that we asked ourselves as a group last week, whenever that was, which is like, what is the perceived and focused benefit of having kids back in the classroom, and why are we doing this? And I don't mean to say that, why are we doing this, but really truly, why do we want this, and why are we focused on this? So that we can maximize our solutions to maximize that benefit. Because if we don't have a clear reason, then it's like, wow, you're going to be on the bus for an hour each day to come to school for 4 hours because it's a shortened day. And during those 4 hours, you're going to have to spend 30 minutes at the sink washing your hands, like all of those pieces. We really need to have a clear understanding of what's the benefit. And I think one of the things that's been more and more clear to me, as a school administrator, is the action steps that can be taken next is really focusing on understanding deeply what professional learning we need to do to make virtual happen, to support teachers to make virtual happen, because virtual is going to be a component of every one of these models. And it's also the area that, I think generally speaking, teachers have the least experience with. They're fantastic at small groups, data-driven instruction, social emotional learning, all of those things in person, but how do we do that in a virtual model? We really need to think about what that looks like. And we kind of need to do it pretty quickly.
And an action step for me, I think, is if we're looking at the hybrid model, is making some really clear decisions on PPEs. And again, we had on our discussion, the doctor brought up, a cloth mask for anybody two and over. But when I first started going into schools about a month ago, we were all told to wear gloves every day, and that has changed. And so whether do we wear gloves, do we not wear gloves, does staff wear gloves? Those decisions are not clear to me at all. The other part that's not clear is how we can, on a large scale, effectively screen students and staff. We do those temperature checks, and there's lots of people, anecdotal feedback about the accuracy of those. And I know there's other types of equipment, and I know there's online questionnaires that kids can fill out before they come in, and that's very much an honor system kind of thing. I worry about the time it would take to come up with a plan to do any kind of realistic or effective screening on a large scale for kids coming in the building.
So from kind of the facilities perspective or CIP perspective, I'm hearing, the needing to define the PPE or screening procedures. I think further defining some of the pickup drop off, like Ms. King, I think you brought up traffic and analyzing what that impact is actually going to be. I think will be pretty critical. What else? Preparing our schools, so setting up the classrooms in the way that we think they're going to have to be set up in.
Ensuring that we have the staff for that, because as of right now, we don't know if the staff is going to come back or not. We need to figure it out if the parents are going to send the children and if the staff is coming back, because there's some staff members that I know are unable to come back because of underlying conditions.
Hi, everyone. I was on the breakout earlier with several of you, and I put in the chat. I'm here we have the Family and Partnerships group, and so we're all each listening into different groups and coming back so that we know how to support from a communications plan, because as many of you are saying, these things need to be communicated out sooner than later. And so coming up with what a timeline for us of what needs to be reported out when and how and to whom. One of the questions that came up, and I'd like to pose to facilities and Erica and whomever may have some guidance on this is, so say we're virtual, virtual and or hybrid, and all of the K-5 kids whose parents are essential workers or have to work, what are those children doing if they're not in school? And so if we're having, and there's a meeting I know tomorrow morning with some of our largest providers like Campania and the REC. Let me remind everyone that those programs often operate in our schools and or a connected building to our schools. So I'm wondering in what capacity we need to consider, is it any different now that we're sending all of these kids, say they get out, they go a half day, or say on the days that they're not in school, that they're going into a rec center or a rec program or Campania program, and they're all going to be together because their parents work. How are we managing that component? Because childcare is going to be huge. Otherwise, these kids are being left at home alone, or parents aren't able to work, and then they're facing homelessness, and the shelters are going to be the worst space for our children. So big picture, how do we manage that?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And I guess related or kind of from the other side for our staff, I know it came up in our group today, if Fairfax and Arlington are both doing this Monday planning day and 2 days on, 2 days off, how much of an impact does that have on what our schedule should be? Based on the fact that a lot of our staff maybe live in Fairfax County. I would say too, though, I think a lot of our staff live in Prince George's or Montgomery County who are maybe doing something totally different. And how do we provide childcare for staff or not? And how do we make sure we're prepared for our staff to not come to work then if we don't offer that?
Right. And then, piggybacking off what Shannon said, you have to think about then how accurate can we ensure that these kids aren't bringing the virus into our staff, because they are getting together with other kids outside of school. We can't manage that, obviously. So how are we ensuring that our staff is going to be safe
Yeah, we had a, no, I wouldn't say a large discussion, but we did discuss the sort of multi-use aspects of all of our spaces and the relationship between, you know, childcare and the ability to enact all of these plans, both childcare from the staff perspective and from the perspective of our students, and where will they go when they're not with us. I think an action step that we need to think about right now with respect to facilities and communication is setting up the framework for how all of this information will be conveyed, especially because I can foresee a circumstance when I look at that chart that Erica shared earlier, where kids might be going to different sites than they typically would be going to. And we want to make sure that we have a robust communication structure to make sure parents understand when and where they're supposed to be somewhere. And that we have accurate communication information via email or phone for all of our families, because that was a really big challenge for us during the closure, was maintaining communication with families and making sure we had current phone numbers for everybody. So those are things that I can think of that would be helpful to do now, no matter what, to set up that communication structure and to make sure families know that, you know, as you said, Shanna, the decision points and when they can expect information about each of the various next steps for them as families.
I can speak really quickly to, I think it was in May that we in communication sent out a letter home to every child, every student. And we sent them to the mailing addresses in school because we got feedback from staff saying that parents were, moving elsewhere for, temporary spaces and providing us with mailing addresses that were different than their usual home, the student's usual home address. So we sent out a letter and a form for them to provide updated communication or contact information and a reply mail envelope, a prepaid envelope for them to return that to our district office. And I don't have data on that right now as how many came back, but it is very expensive, I will say, because there's a lot of postage involved in separate from the amount of cost of printing, but if it's completely vital. And this is a struggle that we struggle with every single year. In fact, that's why the welcome packets are our usual vehicle for getting that information. And so that's a big part of what I do is we want to make sure that and the usual process for this is going to be completely different, but every year we usually give parents a form to fill out the first week of school saying, here, what is your updated contact information? This year, we're thinking that it's going to be completely online through PowerSchool, through Parent Access. However, how do you actually make that happen? And also considering the technological barriers just for people who speak English, let alone people who speak Spanish, and then let alone the fact that PowerSchool and Parent Access are not available currently in Amharic and Arabic. But just to let you know, like that's my world, is getting contact data for all students and parents. But as Ingrid Bynum put it one time, because it's very true, is some parents and families change their phone numbers like they change underwear. So it's kind of a moving target. And so it's like, what are the standards for how often we're doing that to make sure that we're communicating with parents, and not only by text message, email, the things that we have on file, but in other ways that Shanna will attest to, that, those community meetings that Krishna in FACE does, or, other ways to get out to parents with information.
Cindy, go ahead. I see you have your hand raised.
Quick question. I know, when we went to the back half of the spring, there was some conversation at one point about developing a hotline. And I didn't know, did we ever engage that through ACPS, where we actually have a call center or a hotline number? And if not, it might be something that we want to explore, at least until we transition back to a more traditional model, to where we actually have a hotline number where parents can call if there is some confusion or a breakdown of communication, and perhaps have it manned by people that, speak multiple languages that could support our families. Just a thought.
So I can speak to what currently exists. Yes, we have bilingual information lines for Spanish speaking, Amharic and Arabic, which are managed by our division-wide parent liaisons that speak that language, and they are managing many calls every day. However, we need, when we talked about this in our group, for the beginning and opening of school, we're really going to need a much larger call bank, that those 3 people cannot manage it on their own. Especially the Amharic and Arabic are only part-time employees. And so we would need, and I think it would be important to have perhaps maybe counselors or other SST members that manage a student information line, as well as having parent information lines. As with scheduling, the scheduling alone, so this isn't even just about going back to school and all of that processes, but once we're in school, getting the schedules correct, this is going to be enormous, and the changes and such that continue to happen once we're in school. We think that it will be essential to have some type of phone banking system.
Do you know where the phone numbers are housed currently?
They're come out, the 3 language ones are in the Express that usually every day, right, Elena? Or not every day, but every.
Okay, so they're in the Express.
Mhm.
Okay, gotcha.
And they're also any food access information that goes out. They're always tied to the food access page on the website.
Okay, thank you.
So I want to move on to kind of the next part of what we're supposed to do, which is down here in these step 2 and 3. So thinking about the different models and which way does CIP and facilities support either model, and then what should our students, staff, and families expect regardless of the model. So in just thinking about that, I'll say number 1 is that our students, staff, and families should expect safety, and that we're following whatever the health guidelines are. That's where we put it in.
Hey, Erica,
Hey, John.
just kind of in line with that, I just wanted to jump in because this might have been something for a few minutes ago. But as far as safety goes, and something for some of the administrators to consider, is as we are spreading out and considering using different spaces. So if we spread out and use libraries and cafeterias and other spaces for instructional areas, we might need to look at providing some type of divider amongst tables, cafeteria lunch tables, et cetera, if we're using those almost as desks. So we're looking at plexiglass and things like those. So that's something for some of the administrators to consider. There are different spaces in their school that might be used, communicating that to us so we can look at what we can do to kind of create a more safe environment and kind of separating spaces between students.
Yeah, I still think, and I bring this up all the time, I know, and so someone tell me I'm wrong, but it's more of a staffing question than it is a space question. We can turn whatever we want into classrooms or build stuff outside or start dropping trailers, but if we are saying that we need to have a staff member in each of those spaces, I don't know how additional space helps. Or unless we're changing the roles of maybe some of our administrators and other people in the building to actually be giving instruction. I'm not sure how additional space helps, but that's me. But good point. Cindy, I see you have your hand raised, so you can go ahead.
Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. Oh, survey. Just to John's point, do we know when the information that Clint's been doing on the survey, when that's going to be available for us? I think the cutoff was last night. Have we heard anything on when we should expect the results from the survey?
So I believe, I can't remember who is the one of the consultants. She said in our breakout group that it will be Wednesday. I'm not sure if that means that Wednesday it'll be available to all of us on these planning teams. I'm assuming that that's the goal, because it's obviously very difficult to do all this thinking on these things without any information about what parents and teachers think.
I'm glad we'll be getting that soon. I do have a concern about the validity of the data, just because I wonder how tied people are to their responses when they're anonymous surveys versus putting a stake in the ground saying my child will come for 2 days versus my child will do virtual. Plus, I feel like I filled out that survey the first day it came out, and I feel like the state of the world is very different than it was even then. So I just think we also have to have mechanisms to continually access information from those stakeholders so that we're having accurate information about what people's desires are.
So is the conversation, Eric, I'm hearing what you mentioned earlier about having enough teachers available. Is there conversation about in these rooms where if they do report on site that there would be set up for virtual learning with teacher aides? Is that kind of, or has that even been discussed? That you would actually have an adult in the room, but then you would have a virtual teacher to be able to support the need across the district for staff to be able to teach? Or did I miss something there?
Well, we did have, this isn't Erica, this is Lauren, but we did have some discussion. Sorry to answer for you, Erica, I just know you're typing. We did have some conversation about what that could look like. I think we would need to know more about the specifics. We talked about the possibility of having technology infrastructure that would then project one teacher who's teaching live to kids offsite remotely. We talked about would there be a model where kids at, across the district who are in grade 3 are receiving their full virtual instruction from one teacher at one site, not necessarily. So I'm a kid at Cora Kelly, but I'm going to school with kids from all the elementary schools. We talked about those things, but until we actually know what the model is, I don't think we know what that would look like. But technology infrastructure for supporting that virtual instruction was a portion of our conversation.
Were we thinking about a program that will be more student-led, just like what we're using right now in summer school at Zenuity? Would that be something that we can explore as well, so that we can take the load off of teachers so that they can just focus on the classroom teaching? Or would that not be an option?
Speaking from a school-based perspective, I think it could be an option. I think that wouldn't necessarily be a facilities decision per se, but I think it could be an option that there would be a fully developed, externally fully developed content modules that kids would go through if they were fully virtual. Is that what you're asking? Like that because from my perspective as a teacher, right? It's functionally impossible to think about leading full virtual instruction for some students, leading partial in-person instruction for other students, and then the possibility of at any given moment having to abandon all of it and go to a full virtual model for everybody. It's just impossible for one teacher to do all of that.
Correct, because it takes the same amount of time for me to prepare lesson 450 or for 5 students, so I agree with you. And yes, that is what I was referring to.
Erica, I was wondering with regards to students in buildings, if we are required by policy or law to have students stick with their assigned school boundary with regards to the cohort of students that they are in the school classroom with if they were to be in a school, or can you completely break up students based on the parents' preference? If they want, let's say that we went with an option that was more like Charlottesville, where you have kids in the younger grades because they don't have Chromebooks and they're not as easily student-led learning. They were in buildings 4 days a week, but for capacity accommodation, you had students, you don't have them assigned to their school necessarily. They're in a classroom that could have kids from, say, Lyles Crouch and Jefferson Houston or whatever. And then maybe they are physically together in a classroom that is at George Washington Middle School.
Yeah, I think that's a question. I haven't heard any changes to the policies proposed. And so right now, the only reason someone should be going to a school, an elementary school, at least outside of their boundary, is because of capacity reassignment, which would very well change, which is based on class caps, which don't apply here. You know what I mean? Because of social distancing. So our class cap at K is 22. And if we go over that, we send them somewhere else. So it's a question of, was that based on how many kids we can have in person at one time? Or that's based on how many students we think it's reasonable for a teacher to teach at one time, which would change kind of, because to me, right now, everyone should be enrolling in their boundary school. And I think we're applying the same policies right now. So to answer your question, no, it's not set up to do that right now. But I think all these policies will have to be relooked regardless of whether we let kids go outside their boundary or not. And then the question for kind of on the educator side, that just to me, that creates another transition for students. And what, are the benefits, do the benefits gained outweigh the impacts? I don't know.
Well, I think that if you have a school that is not able to meet its capacity, and you have schools that have space, then that's where the benefit would obviously be, is then at least getting those students into a classroom versus them not having an option simply because their school is at capacity.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think none of our schools can meet their enrollment, they're 100%. And so
I meant with like if we're doing 50, 2 days a week for each
right
of the kids or whatever.
Yeah.
Shanna, I have a question really quick. We were speaking about the fact that some of the students are going to summer camp or are going to the rec center summer program. Do we have any data to show that the students have somehow contracted COVID-19 or the staff in those facilities, just so we get an idea of what we're actually, really against, if that makes sense?
I don't know. I don't. Did you direct the question to me? I didn't. Okay. I don't know of any data regarding that. I know that there are limited numbers of students that are being allowed into the summer programs based upon, their parents being essential workers, and there's a cost. So we know that a lot of parents aren't in a position to send right now. But we do have a meeting tomorrow morning with the rec and Campagna Centers with Facility and Alicia Hart. So we may get some more information. We can certainly, I'll pose that question tomorrow.
Thank you.
So you may see that I'm just moving forward. This is what I had written down as, well, not the enrollment policies, I just added that one, but what I had written down is kind of within the purview of CIP and facilities related to the reopening. And then what they're asking us to do is determine whether the scheduling, whatever scheduling model we pick is interdependent, not interdependent, or not applicable for these things, and then just talking about it. So social distancing guidelines, you all heard me talk about that this morning. So I did say that is interdependent because it basically determines how many students you can fit at one time, which will impact the schedule. I put not interdependent here, although I think all of these things have indirect impacts. I don't know if anyone has any comments on that.
I would agree with that one.
Okay.
I think the next one, even with virtual, there will be some thinking about all the other, where kids are going to be the rest of the day, whether it's using facility. I mean, like we said, there's programs going on right now in our schools with kids coming in, even though we're not in school, they're coming into the building. So.
Right, and the more we go virtual, kind of the more there'll be a demand for that. So
right,
I would agree.
I was going to add that I was thinking that too, that virtual doesn't necessarily mean that the facilities are completely unused. And I think I was even starting to think that until I was listening to these conversations. It's probably good to remind people about that.
Yeah.
So then I had outbreak response and basically like, what are we doing? So if someone has COVID, what is our response to the building? So I'm sure health and safety is thinking about cleaning procedures, but are we closing the building? Are we telling our external partners they can't be there? Are we containing the staff and students enough that we don't, they won't have any other interaction with basically other users of the building, and so maybe we don't have to fully shut down the building. That was kind of my thinking about that.
And then don't forget that if I have a sibling that is at another school, then that sibling is automatically infected as well. So what's going to happen to that school as well?
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. So I don't know if I'm trying to think about whether we feel like that impacts the schedule. I mean, it will. I mean, maybe it's just being able to build multiple iterations of the schedule so that if you do have this outbreak, you have a version of the schedule that responds to that.
Well, in the other meeting in the other group that we had, the question was, we have to have a robust online learning because at any point given, we're going to have to transition into it in a matter of days, minutes, I guess. Today you're here, but then tomorrow we're going to do it online. So we have to make sure that the online is a good program in order for us to be able to make that transition immediately.
Yeah, so I'm going to put that it is interdependent for the hybrid model, but maybe not for the virtual. I'm trying to think of a way that it would impact the virtual, but I can't.
For me, because I mean, are we assuming that offshoot of the hybrid model is a virtual model that occurs because of an outbreak, or are we considering virtual to be, because I mean, I don't know.
Yeah,
I foresee like there needing to be some sort of contingency that's fully virtual, and that scheduling will be impacted by outbreak response.
Yeah. Yeah, or even like if we are all virtual, but there's an outbreak in a partner program in the school, maybe it's not just the school schedule, but maybe it's like kind of a broader, more comprehensive ACPS building schedule or something.
Right, and I'm also thinking like with respect to some of the projects that I know have been happening at my site over the summer, like there have been contractors that have, like what do we do with like the processes that are ongoing with capital improvements during this time?
Right. Yep. Okay, we are at 11. I want to be respectful of everybody's time. So I think, I'm not sure exactly what the plan is for Wednesday yet, but hopefully we'll have an opportunity to continue this, and feel free to add into this document. It is our workbook. They updated it and kind of shifted stuff around. So you'll see it's basically right at the top. I'm on page, I don't know what page this is, 6. And so feel free to input here, or if you want to go back and input more of the insights, the wonderings, and the actions related to the schedule, I think that would be great. But overall, I think we got pretty far. I think this was basically what we're supposed to accomplish today, and I'm a little bit clearer. I don't know about how all of you feel. Shanna, you have your hand raised.
Yes, on the one we're just working on, I wanted to add for owner under external partner, if you'll add our office, since we're working with the partners, we also have out of school programming, the 21st century programming that is operating outside the school day. So if you can include in the owners, it's community engagement and partnerships office, just that we're involved in those conversations. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't know I'm not up to date on what everybody's office is called yet. Sorry.
No worries, thank you.
Okay. All right, well, Shanna, hopefully, I might be in that meeting tomorrow, I'm not sure, but hopefully that's a good conversation with some of our partners. I know they're trying to get space. And I will see you all Wednesday. Does anybody have any last comments? No?
No, I'm good.
All right, thank you all. I hope you have a great week.
All right.
Bye-bye.